Community Cares Coalition. But I'm also want to introduce keynote speaker, author Todd Kinney shortly. But before I do that, I want to talk about the vital work of the Waunakee Community Cares Coalition, also known as the WCCC. Our mission is simple yet powerful: to build a stronger, healthier, and more resilient Waunakee. At the WCCC, we believe prevention is the foundation of community wellness. Our goal is to reduce and prevent substance use by focusing on our three key pillars. That's collaboration, education, and engagement. Collaboration means working hand in hand with parents, schools, and local law enforcement, healthcare providers, businesses, and local leaders. Together we create a network of support that makes a real and lasting difference. Education empowers through school programs, speakers like tonight, workshops, and community resources. We provide the tools to make informed, healthy decisions, especially for our youth and their families. And engagement brings it all to life. We invite students to take leadership roles, and we have 3 of them with us tonight, offer families support, and encourage every community member to play a part in creating change. This work matters because when we invest in prevention, we invest in our kids, our families, and our future. And here's where you come in. The WCCC thrives when our community gets involved, like tonight. Volunteer, attend events, have honest conversations, share resources. Every action, big or small, helps move us forward. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for being part of a community that cares. Welcome to the opening night of the Waunakee April Wellness Speaker Series, presented by the WCCC in partnership with the Waunakee Public Library. We're so glad you're here tonight as we continue our mission of supporting mental health, prevention, and wellness across our community. At the WCCC, we believe that real wellness starts with honest conversations, and tonight is one of those moments. We are thrilled to welcome author Todd Kinney, whose powerful story challenges common assumptions about alcohol and addiction. Todd appeared from the outside to have it all together. He was successful, social, and always the life of the party. But inside, he was fighting a private battle with alcohol, trapped in the exhausting cycle of moderation, shame, and self-negotiation. After years of silently struggling, Todd made a decision that changed his life. He chose sobriety. What he thought would be a dull and limiting experience without alcohol turned into a journey of unexpected freedom, clarity, and joy. Todd's book, I Didn't Believe It Either, is raw, relatable, and full of moments that many may see themselves in. It's not just about quitting alcohol, it's about rediscovering life on your own terms. Please join me in giving a warm Waunakee welcome to tonight's featured speaker, Todd Kinney.
Thank you, Tim. I'll just stand here since we're all right here. Thanks for coming. And thanks to Tim, and thanks to the WCCC for having me. I love talking about this subject, and I will talk about it anytime anyone's interested, whether it's 100 people or one person. And I think it's important to talk about. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for coming. So let me just start by telling you kind of my drinking story before I decided to quit, and let you know kind of what kind of drinker I was, because I thought for a long time you had to be a certain kind of drinker in order to need to give up alcohol. And to me, that was, someone who put his car in the ditch and lost his job and had the police called to his house and maybe was at risk of losing his family or his children. And I, as Tim mentioned, from the outside looked like a very normal suburban professional dad. And my drinking looked like a very normal professional suburban dad's drinking. I didn't drink every day. Most of my drinking was on the weekends and in social events. But when I did drink, I didn't mess around. I used to love drinking. And so I would look forward to my drinking events. If I drank on a Saturday night and I knew we had a social event the next Wednesday, I wouldn't drink from Saturday night to Wednesday. But between Saturday and Wednesday, all I thought about was that Wednesday social event. It was on my mind constantly. Um, I would have 7 drinks when most people would have 2. When most people would go to bed for the night, I would come home and pour myself another drink. I tried for years to drink like a normal person. That was what I always wanted to do. I just wanted to drink like a normal person. But I would get drunker than most people when I was in a social situation. Not all the time, but too often. And I didn't like how that made me feel the next day. I mean, I didn't like it in the moment, but I really didn't like how it made me feel the next day. I'd wake up and I'd say to myself, why did you do this again? Why did you let this happen? Why did you drink more than that you said you were going to drink? Why is my wife mad at me? Did I see my kids when I got home and have a conversation with them that I don't remember? I didn't like how that felt. But again, from the outside, everything looked fine. I had a good job. My wife's got a good job. We got 4 healthy kids. We got a nice house. Everything looks pretty normal. But I just didn't like how much alcohol controlled me. It was constantly on my mind. It dictated a lot of what we did socially. It dictated a lot of how I spent my time with my kids. It dictated which restaurants I wanted to go to. It dictated whether or not I wanted to drive somewhere, depending on how much I was going to drink. It had for not drinking every day. It controlled me every day. If I wasn't physically engaging in the act of drinking, I was either recovering from it or I was thinking about it. So in 2013, I started seeing a therapist for the first time. And the reason I started seeing a therapist, I thought, was because my wife and I weren't doing very well. We weren't in a good spot, and I felt like we were in a rut, and we were fighting more than normal. And I didn't like how I was handling our fights. I would kind of shut down and just stop talking, and that wasn't really like me, and that wasn't productive, and it wasn't healthy. And I knew I needed to do something to change. We were falling into a bad pattern and a bad, unhealthy habit. And so I went to a therapist for the first time in 2013. And I walked into her office and she said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, my wife and I are fighting a lot, and I don't like that." And we spent about 2 minutes on that. And the rest of the session, we talked about my drinking. And turns out that was the reason I walked into her office. That's when I started meaningfully evaluating my relationship with alcohol. Was in 2013. I had no intention of quitting at that time because I didn't need to quit at that time, which is what I told myself. I just needed to kind of fix things and figure out how to drink like a normal person. I went through this evaluation period for 6 years, from 2013 to 2019. I'm a slow learner. It took me a while. I tried every moderation hack in the book. But in 2019, in the fall of 2019, I decided to give it up for good. And the main reason why, well, there's lots of reasons why I gave it up, and I'm going to talk about some of those. But the conventional wisdom is you have to get sober for yourself, and that's true. And I think for meaningful sobriety and something that's going to last and something that you're going to get what you can get out of, you do at the end of the day, you have to do it for yourself. But my kids were a huge reason why I ended up quitting drinking. I always tell people I didn't have a spectacular flame out rock bottom, but I had a lot of nudges along the way. And a lot of those nudges came from my kids. And the reason I like to talk about this is because it was the shame and the embarrassment and the regret that I would feel internally after a night of drinking too much was one thing. But it started to become something else when my kids got to be old enough where they started to understand what was going on. And when I started realizing that my issues with alcohol was now becoming their issues, that was too much for me. And that was something I could not run from. I could run from the internal stuff with myself. I could BS my way out of that stuff. I couldn't BS my way out of how it was affecting my kids. So some of the nudges that I got along the way from my kids, I want to talk about. The very first one I remember, and this was in like 2010, 2010 or 2011. So this was before I even started seeing the therapist. My wife and I, and then at that time we had 3 young boys. They were like all under the age of 5 or 6. We were living in my parents' basement. It's not as bad as it sounds. We were building a house, and we had sold ours, and so we needed a place to live for like 6 months. So we're living in my parents' basement with 3 little kids, all under the age of 5. And we had gone out the night before, and just a normal night out, dinner and drinks with some friends, nothing too crazy, but I got plenty drunk. And I woke up the next day and I was really, really hungover. And I took my 3 boys to the donut shop because they got up early, and we always tried to get them out of the house on the weekends, so they wouldn't wake the entire house up. And so I felt like death, but I also knew I needed to kind of atone for the night before. And what does a good dad do on Saturday morning? He takes his kid for donuts. So I took my kids for donuts. I was just trying to survive. I felt like it was terrible. I wasn't listening. I didn't know what my kids were saying. I just wanted to go home and go back to bed. Well, on the way home from the donut shop, I realized I was going to throw up. And I pull my car over in the parking lot of an empty Chinese food restaurant. And I open the door, and my 3 kids are in the back. They're all in car seats. And I open the door and I crouch down by the driver's side door, praying that they can't see what I'm doing. And I threw up on the pavement in this parking lot of a Chinese restaurant. And I get back in the car, and I'm sweating, and I'm kind of shaky, and I'm pale. And I look in the rear view mirror, and I see two of my boys. I see their eyes, and I just think to myself, what am I doing? Like, I'm their dad. I'm their dad. And I just got out of the car to throw up in a Chinese food restaurant in my hometown where I grew up. And I'm driving back to my parents' basement where I'm living. And I didn't let that sit very often or very long because I didn't want to. But that was the first time I remember thinking, what am I doing with this drinking? And I get back in the car, and my oldest says, Dad, what were you doing? And I said, I was just checking the tires, son. So again, that didn't last very long, but it's the first time I remember thinking, this is not reconciling with kind of the life I want to have as a dad and the example I want to set for my kids. Another nudge happened after we had 3 boys at the time. We now have four kids total, 3 boys and a girl. As the boys started to get older, teenagers, 11, 12, 13, I started noticing how much they were around alcohol, and not just around alcohol, but how much they were around adults drinking excessively, me included. But our social group was full of people who liked to drink and drank a lot every weekend. And I just started to notice how much our kids were around this and what they were seeing. And I didn't love that. I didn't want to stop drinking. I didn't hate it enough to to stop drinking, but it landed on my radar screen. And it just didn't feel great about the example we were setting for them and what they were seeing. And I noticed we all, me included, we just checked out as parents when it came time to drink. And I was one of the worst offenders. If it was a Friday night, that was my drinking time. And I did not want my kids I didn't want anything to get in the way of that. My spouse, my kids, that was it. That was the main attraction. Nothing was going to get in the way. And I just checked out as a dad. And I didn't even realize I was doing that until I got some time away from alcohol. And I didn't realize what an impact that can have on kids until I got some time away from alcohol. And then one of the bigger nudges I got from my oldest, this was about 6 months before I quit, was in the summer of 2019. Me and a friend and 2 of my kids and like 3 or 4 other kids went to a College World Series game. And we were all sitting in different seats. Like I was sitting with my friend and then the kids were sitting in like 2 different sets of seats. So when we got to the stadium, we all scattered and sat in our own seats. And I was driving that day. And so I hadn't had very much to drink at all before or during the game. And my son hadn't seen me drink very much. But when we gathered back in the concourse after the game to meet up to drive home, he said, "Dad, do we need to take an Uber home?" And I said, "No, why do you ask that?" And he said, "Well, sometimes when you and Mr. Johnson get together, things can get pretty rowdy," he said. And I could not stop thinking about that comment the rest of the day. And it was the first thing I thought of the next morning when I woke up. I couldn't shake it. I was so bothered by it because here's a 14-year-old boy who felt the need to ask his dad if we needed to take an Uber home because he was worried about not having a safe ride home from a baseball game. And I just thought, again, what am I doing? Like, parenting is hard. It's really hard. And the one thing you always want to do as a parent, and the one thing you'd like to think you can always do as a parent, no matter what else is going on or what you know or don't know, is keep your kids safe. Like that's what all parents want at the end of the day. You know, at a minimum, you just want your kids to feel safe. And my kid didn't feel safe. He didn't know if he had a safe ride home from a baseball game because he had seen me drink too much in the past. And I just thought, what am I doing? Is this what I want? Is this what I want my kids? Do I want my kids worrying about a safe ride home from their father? That was in the summer of 2019. Later, like 2 or 3 months later, I had a mediation in Orlando, Florida. And I was sitting in a conference room and the lawyer on the other side, we were just killing time. We were just making small talk. And he said, just as an aside, we were kind of telling some stories, and I think there were some drinking stories being told. And he said, "Yeah, I gave up drinking when my oldest became a teenager because I was worried about the example I was setting for him." And I thought, oh my God, are you kidding me? And I was like, in my head, of course I let it go like, oh, no big deal. I said, "Oh, good for you, you know, blah, blah, blah." And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy, he's about my age. He had kids around my age. We're both lawyers. We worked at similar firms. We had very similar jobs. And I thought, there's a real life example of someone sitting across the table from me who gave up drinking and lived to tell about it. And he didn't look like he was miserable. And I thought, huh. And I could not stop thinking about that comment for weeks after our mediation. And it was almost like him saying that gave me permission to start seriously considering giving up drinking. And I needed that. And that was extremely impactful for me, just his one comment at our mediation. And then about 2 months later, we were in Arizona for a weekend celebrating a good family friend's 40th birthday. So it was all adults. It was a really fun group. We've known them forever. And it's always a good time when we get together. And so we had a day, I think it was Saturday of that trip. We all spent the day by the pool. It was a beautiful day. It was a nice resort. Everybody's drinking. I'm drinking more than everyone else. And it comes time to get ready for dinner that night. And my wife is like, why don't you stay in the room? And I was like, you're being ridiculous. And she said, no, you're wasted. Just stay in the room, stay in for the night. You're not going to enjoy dinner. Nobody's going to enjoy being at dinner with you. And I said, it's fine. I just need to get some food and it'll be fine. So I go down to dinner. We have this private room reserved. I walk into the room. I'm the drunkest one in the room by far. And I sit down at the table and my parents are sitting at the other end of this table. And my wife whispers into my ear, she says, your parents are staring at you. And I was like, what? And she said, your parents are staring at you. And I kind of let it go at the time because I thought she was being ridiculous. But again, it was the first thing I thought of when I woke up the next morning. And what I was thinking was, my parents are two of the most loving, compassionate people on the face of the earth. And so I wasn't thinking they were looking at me with disgust or disdain. What I thought was, they were looking across that table at me and they probably felt sad about what they saw. And they probably felt sad for my wife and they felt sad for me. And that took me back to like being an 8-year-old kid. And it wrecked me. I felt I wanted to crawl out of my skin. And for all the mornings, for the hundreds of mornings that I had woken up and felt the regret and the shame and the embarrassment of the night before, this was all that on a totally different level. I just couldn't shake the idea that I had made my parents sad with my drinking. And I got home that Sunday and had another talk with myself and said, how many times are we going to do this? How many times? It's no fun feeling like this. And yet here we are again. And so I decided on that day, I was going to take a 3-month break. I had done that before. I knew I could do it. It felt like I needed to sufficiently punish myself for the Arizona weekend. And so I'm like, I wasn't committed to quitting for good, but I'm like, 3 months, no question. You're doing that at the very least. And then my therapist said, why don't you make it 6 months? Because you've done the 3-month thing before. And here we are. So I said, okay. I was still in the mode of, I felt like I had to show myself I was taking this serious and I was doing something about it. But in the back of my mind, this time was different. It felt different because I was done. I was done. I was tired of my own bullshit. Excuse my language. I was tired of it. And about between month 3 and 4, I remember where I was in Omaha driving down the road. And I had this realization that, I think everyone has at some point before they stop drinking. And I had the realization that I will never control my drinking to the extent I want to. It will never happen. I can go 4 or 5 months and drink fine and not have any incidents, but it will never be controlled. No matter what, and I don't know why, and why is not really important. But I finally admitted to myself. And by that time, I was at a point where I really wanted to make a change. And so I thought, well, if I really want to make a change, and I'm finally accepting that I will never control this to the extent I want to, then there's only one thing left to do, and that's to give it up for good. And that wasn't an easy decision to make, But the choice became very easy for me to see. It crystallized right in front of me. If I was serious about making a change, there was only one thing left to do. And so I decided then I was going to quit. Now, it took me another week before I said it out loud to my wife, because I knew once those words left my mouth and my wife heard them, I couldn't go back. Because what kind of a-hole tells his wife he's going to quit drinking and then goes back? I didn't want to do that. So I felt like a little kid when you're getting ready to confess something to your parents, and it takes a while to muster up the courage to say it. That's how I felt before I finally said those words to my wife. And so that was so October 2019 ended up being the last time I drank, and I haven't looked back. And a big reason why I wanted to write this book was because when I decided I was going to quit drinking, I knew it was the right decision for me. I knew in my heart it was what I needed to do. What I also thought I knew was that life was going to be a little boring and a little dull, and I was just going to have to live with that. That was my penance for not figuring out how to drink like a normal person. And I thought, well, I don't love that, but it's where I am. And I could not have been more wrong about that. If you would have told me 5.5 years ago how much I would love a life without alcohol, I would have told you that you're absolutely insane, and I wouldn't have believed it. But I have discovered a new way to live that I didn't know existed. And I tell some of these stories in the book, but in the same way that my kids kind of gave me the nudges to finally give it up, I started to have some moments with them where I realized this is so much better than what I was doing. And one of my first ones was a trip with my daughter to Houston to see the U.S. women's soccer team play. And I was about 4 months sober at this time. And she was 7 at the time, I think. And before we went to the game, we went to one of those, arcade bowling alley places, and we played skee ball, and we bowled, and we played ping pong. And I had an experience that day where I was almost seeing that day through her eyes. I wasn't drinking. And I was very aware that I wasn't drinking, because that was a occasion where I would have been, we're out of town. I wasn't driving anywhere. We're going to a sporting event. That would have been a day where I would have had a few. And I didn't. And instead of worrying about how many drinks I had had, whether or not Scarlett was noticing that I was starting to act a little funny, I just was there with her and enjoyed the day. And that was a different experience. I always had fun with my kids, but this was different. It felt different. I felt like a little kid that day with her. And then we went to the game, and we went back to the hotel afterwards. And one of my favorite things to do is snuggle with my kids. And my boys were too old. They didn't like doing that anymore. And Scarlett climbed into bed, and she said she wanted to snuggle, and she laid her head on my shoulder, and we just talked. And I thought, this is life. This is what living is about. If I had been drinking that day, I would have been drunk by the time we got back to the hotel room. I would have been focused on whatever I was drinking in the hotel room. And I would have woken up the next day, maybe not feeling great. And I just sort of would have wasted the night away. It wouldn't have, my focus would have been, yes, on my daughter, but it also would have been on my drinking. And that was gone. There was nothing distracting me. And I laid there that night, and I just thought, drinking can't compete with this. This is what I want. This is, we get one shot at this parenting thing. We get one shot. And I don't dwell too much on the nights that I when I was drinking that I had with them where I didn't experience that stuff, but man, if you gave me the choice to go back and experience every single moment with my kids from the day they were born as a drinking dad or a sober dad, it's no contest what I'd choose. Um, I had another incident with my son, my oldest again. This was about, I think, a year after I quit drinking. And it was a summer night. We went over to see some friends. These friends, the husband and wife, they have kids our kids' age. They like to drink. I always liked hanging out with them because I never felt that bad about my drinking when I was with this guy. And so we go over, we grill out, nothing crazy. They drank, I didn't. We get home and it's like 9:30-ish at night, and Austin and my wife get in a fight. Austin's my oldest. And they get in a fight, and he's really nasty to her and just kind of a jerk to her and said some mean things. And um, he goes down to his room, slams his door. My wife goes up to our bedroom, starts getting ready for bed. And I went downstairs and I said, don't talk to your mother like that. You need to be respectful, And then I go back upstairs. And I went back upstairs and my therapist's words started ringing in I started playing her words in my head. And her words whenever I would talk to her about Austin were, show him some grace. Show him some grace. And I kept thinking about that and I said, okay. And I started thinking, I was like, something's bothering him. It's not the fight he just had with my wife. That's not what, I don't even remember what it was about. But when kids act out like that, it's usually not what they're acting out about. It's something else. And I went downstairs to his, and if I had been drinking, none of that would have happened. I would have gone upstairs. I would have gone to bed. I would have been tired. I wouldn't have been motivated to do anything but get ready for bed and climb into bed and go to bed. Well, instead I go downstairs and I walked into his room and I said, what's going on? And we talked for like 45 minutes. And he told me some fairly heavy stuff that had been going on with him that I had no idea about. And we just talked. And I didn't know what to say. And I was trying to search, I'm looking for the perfect thing to say and it's not coming to me. And all I can think to do is hug him and tell him I love him. And he cried and I cried. And we didn't solve anything that night, but we had a really good talk. And I left feeling a little anxious about what it was that was bothering him. But I also felt really good that we had that conversation. And that was a conversation that would not have taken place if I had drank that night. And those things, especially with teenagers, those conversations matter. Even in the moment, if they're not life altering, they're building blocks and they're conversations that make your son want to come back and talk to you again the next time something's bothering him. And one of the things that I have been so grateful to experience as a sober dad is the number of those types of conversations I have with kids now on a Friday night or a Saturday night is huge that I never had before. I'll have conversations with my kids. Well, not really anymore because they're 20, 18, and 16. But when they were early teens, they and their friends would be over on Friday night at 10 o'clock. And you walk into the room and you just find yourself having a conversation with them. I never had those before, or nothing meaningful, because I was always focused on my drinking. And again, those things are little things, but those little things add up to big things, especially with teenagers. And I think as parents, we have a tendency to think when your kids get to be teenage years, they tend to pull back. They don't want your opinion as much. Their peer group starts to become their dominant, influencing factors. And it can feel like they don't want you and they don't need you. It feels like that a lot of days with teenagers. But in reality, that's when they need you the most. The teen years are tough. And they need their parents during those years. And the sense of calm and peace that I have now, knowing that if something happens at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, and it will if you have teenagers, that I'll be there, that I'll be available to handle whatever it is priceless. I just had a friend who got a call in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago from his wife at like midnight. He was on a golf trip because their daughter had been having some pretty serious mental health struggles. And I thought, oh my God, in my drinking days, if I was on a golf trip in Las Vegas and I got a call at midnight on a Saturday night, I would have been useless to my wife, to my daughter. And knowing that that will never happen is feels really good. Feels really good. So one of the big reason why I wanted to write this book is one, to give people hope who were in the same boat I was in 5.5 years ago, because at one point I felt like I was on an island. And I literally thought, there's nobody else in the world who struggles with alcohol the way I do. And of course, I've since come to find out that's not true at all. There are loads of people who struggle just like I did. And hearing other people's stories for me was extremely helpful. And I wanted to find a way to put my story out there. And I also wanted to put a story out there to hopefully sort of normalize people thinking about doing something about their drinking, even if it's not the stereotypical drinking problem. You know, drinking issues come in all shapes and sizes. For one person, they could have 25 drinks a week, and maybe it's not a problem. For another person, they could have 10 drinks, 5 drinks a week, and it is a problem. It doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter. The amount you're drinking doesn't matter. The frequency with which you're drinking doesn't matter. If it's causing problems in your life to the extent you want and need to make a change, that's the beginning, middle, and end of the story. That's it. And talking about this stuff and talking about giving up alcohol comes with so much baggage in our society. It's you have to explain yourself. You have to worry about. One of my big concerns before I gave up drinking was like, what are people going to think? They're going to think I was rolling out of bed and taking a swig from a bottle of vodka. And I didn't want people thinking that. Now I don't really care, but at the time, I was really worried about that. And I didn't like that. You know, it's like if you decide to do something good for yourself and get rid of something in your life that's causing a problem, that's also a toxin, by the way, and poison is, poison for your body. You have to explain to people why you're doing that. And so I would like to kind of normalize people just deciding they want to take something out of their life that's not serving them. Because at the end of the day, that's what alcohol was for me. These scales had tipped. I love drinking, and I had a lot of fun doing it for many years. But the scales tipped, where the negatives were outweighing the fun. And whatever good I was getting out of it was just being overshadowed by the bad. And I decided to do something about it. And I want other people to know that most of what they think is going to happen if they give up drinking doesn't happen. That was the case for me. I have a chapter in the book. It's called None of the Bad Things Happened. I had all these bad things that I was convinced were going to happen. None of them did. And then on top of that, I discovered this way of living that I had no idea was out there. And I tell people all the time, giving up drinking was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make. But if I had known what awaited me, it would have been the easiest. So thank you for coming. I appreciate you listening to my story. And I hope you'll continue to talk about this and spread the word yourselves. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah, good question. Not right away. um, yeah, that was I have a chapter on that in the book because that was a part of this whole thing that I did not see coming. It was my wife and I struggled um, for a while after I quit. We had to kind of recalibrate. She still drinks, and I don't know if she ever really wanted me to quit drinking. She wanted me to figure out how to drink like a normal person. But like most couples, it was very center to our social life. And I think she thought, what does this mean for us? Like, are we still going to get invited places? Can I still drink? What does all this mean? And it was for the first time in my marriage, we've been married, it'll be 24 years this summer. And for the first time in about the like 4 to 8 month period after I quit, I started having some serious doubts about whether sober me was compatible with my marriage. And that really scared me. And we just had to figure things out. And so we had some discussions that we had never had before, which we needed to have. I think she had a lot of resentment built up from my years of drinking that she had never fully expressed. And I think she felt a little blindsided when I said I was going to quit because a lot of all that stuff was going on inside me. I didn't talk to her about it very much. So I think she was a little surprised. So it was hard. It was harder than I thought. But we just kind of worked at it and we just figured it like I got more comfortable as a non-drinker. She got more comfortable with me as a non-drinker. And we figured it out. But that was an unexpected hurdle. I think a lot of people deal with that. So I did not. No. No, I never did. I didn't think I would love it, but I've never been to an AA meeting, so that's probably unfair. And I know a lot of people who have said that, that it saved their life. But I was a little, at the beginning, I thought, I can do this. I can do this on my own. And then I remember my therapist at like 4 months was like, you need a community. You're doing this on your own. And my first reaction was like, I don't think I do. I think I'm doing fine. And then I found a community and an online sobriety support group. And I thought, oh my God, this is what my therapist was talking about. She was right. So whether it's AA or another group, connection is huge when you're doing something like giving up drinking. It's just huge. It makes you feel less alone. And every time I heard someone tell their story, I learned something from it. And just going from feeling like you're completely on an island to knowing that there's hundreds and hundreds of people out there who are dealing with the exact same thing is a big, big deal. So yeah, that's one of my always first pieces of advice for people is find a community. Doesn't matter where or what it looks like. Just find your people. Good question. My dad quit drinking when I was 25, 26 years old. So I was out of the house. He was what I call a very high functioning alcoholic. He was a lawyer, very successful, very good dad. It never seemed, well, when I sat down to write the book, I discovered two things. One, his drinking affected me more growing up than I thought it did. And two, his quitting affected me more than I thought it did. But he was the same kind of thing. Like you looked in the outside and everything looked fine. But he did drink every night. And he gave it up for Lent one year and never went back. So, and I have since found out there are lots of instances on both sides, my mom's family and my dad's family. It's crazy how, when you start digging into that, how prevalent it is. So yes, it does run in the family, I think. Well, thank you. Thank you. It was, yes, it's been an unbelievable blessing for me personally and for my family. Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, there was it's funny because I've always been fairly active and I've always liked to work out and I've paid decent attention to, what I eat. But this is how I used to think about things. I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning after a night of drinking and I'd go to the gym and I'd put in a hard workout and I'd be like, well, I don't have a problem because look at what I just did. And what you realize after you quit drinking is, like working out when you're drinking on a regular, when you're over drinking on a regular basis, like I was, it's like running into a 70-mile-an-hour headwind. It's like trying to run a marathon with a 75-mile-an-hour headwind. Like, yeah, you're getting exercise, but you're putting a ceiling on what you're going to get out of it. And so I started to notice I was getting more out of my exercising. And the other thing is you have a lot more time when you give up alcohol. So you have more time to work out. You have more time to pay attention to what you're eating. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just turned 50 2 weeks ago. So I don't know how different I would feel at 50 if I was still drinking. I wouldn't feel as good as I do. And it does give me some peace of mind as I get older that I at least removed something that is guaranteed to not help you from a health standpoint, especially as we get older. I mean, I think it's about the worst thing we can do as we get older. There's probably a few bad things, but knowing that I took that out of my life makes me feel better about aging. So, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys coming. Yes.